One act of kindness changed everything for Mark Reynolds. When he stepped in to help his intoxicated boss escape a dangerous situation, he never imagined it would transform both their lives forever. Stay with me until the end to discover how this unexpected night led two broken people to find healing, redemption, and a second chance at happiness. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to see more stories about how compassion can bridge the gaps between us, even when we least expect it. Mark Reynolds was the last person left at Callahan's bar on a rainy Thursday night in October. He nursed his single beer, the only drink he'd allow himself when he had to drive home to his daughter, and checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The babysitter had texted that Emma was finally asleep after a difficult evening, which meant he could head home without worrying about bedtime battles. He was just about to signal for the check when the door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air and Katherine Winters, CEO of Meridian Publishing and, more relevantly, his direct boss. Mark froze, beer halfway to his lips. In the 3 years he'd worked as a senior editor at Meridian, he'd never seen Katherine in a setting like this. She was always impeccably put together, intimidatingly professional, and notoriously private about her personal life. The woman who stumbled through the door of the neighborhood bar, however, was barely recognizable as the same person. Her usually perfect blonde bob was disheveled, her expensive blazer was missing a button, and she moved with the deliberate care of someone trying very hard to appear sober and failing spectacularly. Mark slouched lower in his booth, hoping she wouldn't notice him. Office politics were complicated enough without adding an awkward after-hours encounter to the mix. But as Katherine made her way to the bar, her gaze swept the nearly empty room and landed squarely on him. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by something that looked almost like relief. "Reynolds," she said, her crisp British accent slightly slurred as she changed course and headed toward his booth. "Fancy meeting you here." "Ms. Winters," Mark acknowledged, straightening up. "Good evening." She slid into the booth across from him with none of her usual grace. Up close, he could see that her eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from crying or drinking was hard to tell. Probably both. "Reynolds," she repeated, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "The quiet one. Always on time with your manuscripts. Never asks for extensions. Single father, if I recall correctly?" Mark nodded, surprised she knew that detail about him. "Yes. My daughter, Emma. She's 6. Katherine signaled to the bartender without taking her eyes off Mark. "Scotch, neat," she called out, then returned her attention to him. 6. Difficult age. They start asking questions you can't answer. Before Mark could respond to this unexpected observation, the bartender delivered Katherine's drink. She downed half of it in one swallow, closing her eyes briefly as the alcohol hit her system. "Should you be drinking that so quickly?" Mark asked before he could stop himself. Katherine's eyes snapped open, a flash of her usual authority returning. "Are you monitoring my alcohol consumption, Reynolds?" "No, ma'am. Just concerned." "Don't be. I'm perfectly capable of handling my liquor." She finished the rest of the scotch as if to prove her point. "Most days." Mark shifted uncomfortably. This was venturing into territory far beyond the professional relationship they maintained at work. Katherine Winters was known throughout the publishing industry for her brilliant editorial eye and her ice-cold demeanor. In editorial meetings, she could dismantle a manuscript with surgical precision, never raising her voice but leaving no doubt about her dissatisfaction. Authors both feared and revered her. Employees respected her but kept their distance. And now she was sitting across from him, clearly intoxicated and seemingly intent on conversation. "It's my birthday," she announced suddenly, signaling for another drink. 42 years on this planet, and what do I have to show for it? A corner office. A empty penthouse. A failed marriage. And a publishing house that the board is threatening to restructure into oblivion. Mark blinked, taken aback by the personal revelation. Happy birthday. A short, bitter laugh escaped her. Yes, very happy indeed. Celebrating alone in a bar I've never been to before, unloading on an employee who's clearly desperate to escape. She glanced at his nearly empty beer. Don't let me keep you, Reynolds. I'm sure you need to get home to your daughter. There was something in her tone, a resignation, a loneliness, that made Mark hesitate. The responsible thing would be to pay his tab and leave. Katherine Winters was not his friend, she was his boss, and whatever personal crisis she was experiencing was none of his business. But the father in him, the part that had learned to recognize pain in all its disguises, couldn't just walk away. The babysitter says Emma's already asleep, he found himself saying. I have time for another drink, if you'd like company. Surprise flickered across Katherine's face, quickly masked by a return to her usual composure. I don't need a babysitter, Reynolds. I didn't offer to be one. Just thought you might want someone to talk to. Birthdays can be tough. Katherine studied him for a long moment, as if trying to discern his motives. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of her chin. Very well. But you're drinking something stronger than that beer. It's depressing to drink alone. Mark smiled despite himself. Even drunk and disheveled, Katherine Winters was used to giving orders. One scotch, he agreed. But then I really do need to get home. One scotch turned into a conversation that stretched longer than Mark had intended. Katherine, it turned out, was a different person outside the confines of Meridian Publishing. The alcohol had lowered her formidable defenses, revealing glimpses of sharp wit and unexpected vulnerability. She told him about growing up in London, the daughter of a famous literary critic who had never thought her good enough. About coming to New York at 23 with nothing but ambition and a talent for spotting good writing. About building her career book by book, author by author, until she'd earned the top position at Meridian. And now they want to take the company in a new direction, she said, making air quotes with her fingers. Which means more celebrity memoirs, more ghost-ridden drivel, and less of the literary fiction that actually matters. Is that why you're drinking alone on your birthday? Mark asked, genuinely curious. Katherine's expression darkened. Part of it. The board meeting didn't go well today. And then I came home to finalize my divorce papers. 5 years of marriage, ended with a signature. Not that it was much of a marriage toward the end. She signaled for another drink, which the bartender delivered with a concerned glance at Mark. Maybe we should get some food to go with that, Mark suggested gently. Don't parent me, Reynolds. I get enough of that from my assistant. But there was no real bite to her words, and she didn't protest when he ordered a basket of fries for the table. As the evening progressed, Mark found himself sharing more than he'd intended as well. He told her about Emma's mother walking out when their daughter was just 8 months old, unable to handle the responsibilities of parenthood. About juggling his career with single fatherhood, the constant guilt of never feeling like he was doing enough on either front. That's why you turned down the promotion to executive editor last year, Katherine said, the pieces clicking into place. The travel would have been too much with Emma. Mark nodded, surprised she remembered. She needs stability. I'm all she has. She's lucky, Katherine said quietly. To have a father who puts her first. There was something in her voice, old pain, perhaps, that made Mark wonder about Katherine's own father, the famous critic she'd mentioned. Before he could ask, however, the bartender approached their table. Last call, folks. We're closing up in 15. Mark checked his watch, shocked to find it was nearly 1 a.m. I need to get home, he said, reaching for his wallet. Let me take care of this. Katherine waved him off. Don't be ridiculous. I've had far more than you, and it's my birthday. I'm paying. She pulled out a credit card, but her movements were uncoordinated, and the card slipped from her fingers, landing under the table. When she bent to retrieve it, she nearly toppled out of the booth. Let me, Mark said, helping her upright again. How are you getting home? Car service, Katherine replied, though she made no move to call one. Or I might walk. It's only 20 blocks or so. In this weather? At this hour? That's not a good idea. Mark glanced out the window at the rain, which had intensified into a proper downpour. Let me call you a car. Katherine's expression hardened suddenly. I don't need your help, Reynolds. I'm perfectly capable of getting myself home. The abrupt shift in her demeanor took Mark by surprise. One moment they'd been having a genuine conversation, the next, the walls were back up, higher than before. Of course, he said carefully. I didn't mean to overstep. Katherine stood, swaying slightly but managing to maintain her balance. Thank you for the company. I'll see you at the office tomorrow. She walked toward the door with as much dignity as she could muster, which was considerable given her state. Mark watched her go, torn between respect for her independence and concern for her safety. The responsible thing would be to make sure she got home safely, but she'd made it clear his help wasn't wanted. With a sigh, he paid his portion of the bill and followed her outside, intending to at least make sure she got into a taxi. But when he stepped onto the rain-slicked sidewalk, he found Katherine engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly heated argument with a man he didn't recognize. I said I'm not interested, Katherine was saying, her voice carrying clearly despite the rain. Please leave me alone. The man, tall, expensively dressed, with the overly confident demeanor of someone used to getting his way, stepped closer to her. Come on, beautiful. Don't be like that. Let me give you a ride home. No, thank you, Katherine replied, her tone icy despite her intoxication. I've already called a car. I don't see any car, the man persisted, reaching for her arm. And you look like you could use some help. Mark moved before he could think better of it, stepping between Katherine and the stranger. The lady said she's not interested, he said firmly. I suggest you respect that. The man sized Mark up, clearly trying to determine if he was worth the trouble. Mark wasn't particularly imposing, average height, lean rather than muscular, but there must have been something in his expression that gave the man pause. Whatever, the man muttered finally. Frigid bitch isn't worth it anyway. He stalked off into the rain, leaving Mark and Katherine standing awkwardly under the bar's awning. Katherine's earlier bravado had evaporated, and she suddenly looked very small and very tired. Thank you, she said quietly. That was unnecessary, but appreciated. Are you sure you don't want me to call you a car? Mark asked, keeping his tone neutral. No strings attached. Just making sure you get home safely. Katherine hesitated, then nodded once. That would be helpful. Thank you. Mark pulled out his phone and ordered a rideshare. It'll be here in 3 minutes. Black Toyota Camry. They stood in silence, watching the rain. Katherine hugged her arms around herself, shivering slightly in her thin blazer. Without thinking, Mark shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. I don't need, she began automatically, then stopped herself. Thank you, she amended, pulling the jacket closer around her. When the car arrived, Mark opened the door for her. Text me when you get home safely, he asked, then immediately regretted the familiarity. I mean, I don't have your number, Katherine pointed out, a hint of amusement in her voice. Right. Mark felt his face warm despite the cool air. He recited his number, not really expecting her to remember it in her current state. To his surprise, Katherine pulled out her phone and entered it carefully. I'll text you, she promised, sliding into the car. And Reynolds? Thank you. For everything. As the car pulled away, Mark stood in the rain for a moment longer, trying to process the surreal evening. Had he really just spent hours talking to Katherine Winters, the Ice Queen of Meridian Publishing? Had she really opened up to him about her divorce, her childhood, her fears for the company? And more importantly, what would Monday morning bring? Would she pretend none of it had happened? Would there be awkwardness, or worse, professional repercussions? These questions followed him home, where he paid the babysitter and checked on Emma, sleeping peacefully with her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. Looking at his daughter's face, innocent and trusting in sleep, Mark felt the familiar surge of love and protectiveness that had guided his every decision since becoming a father. Whatever happened at work, he had done the right thing tonight. He had shown kindness to someone who needed it, regardless of their professional relationship. That was the example he wanted to set for Emma, that compassion mattered more than hierarchy or convenience. His phone buzzed just as he was getting ready for bed. Home safe. Thank you again. KW. Short and to the point, but she had remembered. Mark smiled to himself as he set the phone down. Monday would be interesting, to say the least. Mark spent the weekend trying not to think about Thursday night and largely failing. He took Emma to the park on Saturday, helped her with her reading homework, made pancakes shaped like animals on Sunday morning, all their usual routines. But in quiet moments, his mind kept returning to Katherine Winters and the vulnerability she'd shown him. By Monday morning, he had convinced himself that she would either ignore what had happened or, worse, be embarrassed by it. He prepared himself for awkwardness as he dropped Emma off at school and headed to the Meridian offices in Midtown. The editorial floor was buzzing with its usual Monday energy when he arrived. Mark nodded to colleagues as he made his way to his office, a small but private space he'd earned with his promotion to senior editor 3 years ago. He had just settled at his desk when his assistant, Jen, appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Winters wants to see you in her office," she said, her expression curious. "Right away, apparently." Mark's stomach dropped. Here it comes, he thought. The awkward conversation, the professional distance reasserted, maybe even a warning about boundaries. "Thanks, Jen. I'll head up now." Katherine's office occupied the corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the city. Her assistant, a formidable woman named Margaret who guarded Katherine's time like a dragon with treasure, looked up as Mark approached. "Go right in, Mr. Reynolds. She's expecting you." Mark took a deep breath and entered the office. Katherine was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. She turned as he entered, and Mark was struck by how different she appeared from the woman at the bar. Today she was back to her usual self, perfectly tailored navy suit, blonde hair in its precise bob, makeup flawless. Only the slight shadows under her eyes hinted at Thursday night's excesses. "Reynolds," she said, her voice cool and professional. "Thank you for coming up." "Of course, Ms. Winters." She gestured to the chairs arranged around a small conference table rather than the more intimidating seat across from her desk. "Please, sit." Mark took a seat, bracing himself for whatever was coming. Katherine remained standing for a moment longer, as if gathering her thoughts, then joined him at the table. "I owe you an apology," she began, surprising him. "My behavior on Thursday night was unprofessional and put you in an uncomfortable position." "There's no need to apologize," Mark said quickly. "It was after hours, Anne." Katherine held up a hand, stopping him. "Please, let me finish. I've spent the weekend thinking about this, and it's important that I say this properly." Mark nodded, falling silent. "I shared personal information that was inappropriate given our professional relationship. I drank too much. I allowed you to see me in a vulnerable state. And then I put you in a position where you felt obligated to ensure my safety." She met his eyes directly. "For all of that, I apologize." "Apology accepted," Mark said, though truly unnecessary. "We're all human, Ms. Winters. Even CEOs are allowed to have bad days." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Nevertheless, I wanted you to know that I remember everything that happened, and I'm grateful for your kindness and discretion." Mark had expected her to pretend the night never happened, to draw a firm line between their professional and personal interactions. This direct acknowledgement caught him off guard. "You're welcome," he said simply. "I'm glad you got home safely." Katherine nodded, then reached for a folder on the table.